Today, Seattle is one of the most recognized cities in the country and throughout the world. Viewed as a vibrant place, Seattle is nationally known for producing the latest in computer and air transportation technologies, as well as providing the hub for the headquarters of some of the world's biggest companies. So whether one is a huge fan of Seattle's exciting economy and great coffee, an outdoor enthusiast who enjoys Seattle's close proximity to Mount Rainier, Seattle has something for everybody and is no doubt a sight to behold. However, Seattle wasn't always the wonder that it is now. Before the 1960s, barely anyone outside of the Pacific Northwest paid any attention to Seattle, let alone knew about it. But one event would forever alter the fate of Seattle. Change is usually gradual, a slow sequence of events of which it is difficult to determine the varying degrees of importance of each event. This was not the change that Seattle underwent. This change was not gradual. There is no question that this particular brief 6-month event would forever turn Seattle into an economic powerhouse and a cultural wonder, as well as inspire a nation. That event was the Seattle World's Fair, or the Century 21 Exposition. Having only one reputable business to its name, Seattle's economic success and national recognition was completely dependent on Boeing's boom and bust economic performance. During World War II, Seattle and Boeing were credited for being a major military supplier of fighting and bombing planes. Other than that, Seattle was a remote, unknown place with a shallow, undiverse economy that entirely depended on Boeing. Seattle civic leaders had pride in their city and were eager for an event that would free Seattle from isolation and open up other economic opportunities beyond Boeing's boom or bust cycle. In 1955, Seattle City Councilman Al Rochester dreamed up the idea of having a World's Fair in Seattle. However, his vision of the fair was far different than the end result. Earlier in his life, Rochester attended the 1909 Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition, which was a belated 10-year celebration of the Klondike Gold Rush, as well as a celebration of Pacific cultures. Rochester wanted this fair to be a celebration of the past. Other ideas for the fair were the centennial mark of the border between the US and Canada and a festival of the West. Not surprisingly, there wasn't much demand for such a celebration. Funding was scarce, and any kind of excitement for this kind of fair was hard to come by. But on October 4th, 1957, the Russians did something that would change the fate of the fair in Seattle forever. On this day, at the height of the Cold War, the Russians launched the first man-made satellite into the air. This satellite, a 180-pound metal sphere, was the genesis of the battle for space supremacy between the two world superpowers. The launching of Sputnik opened America's eyes. Political leaders insisted that as a society, the US had not put enough emphasis on technological advancement and scientific discovery. And during this particular time of conflict, where supremacy and dominance dictate the winner of the Cold War, losing the space race to the Russians was not an option. Sputnik provided a rationale for the fair that was not present before the launch. The United States was lacking in scientific and technological innovation in comparison to the Russians. The opportunity presented itself for Seattle, an aerospace city, to lead the charge against the Russians in the space race and the battle for the future. By heightening Cold War tensions, Sputnik ensured the fair would not be a celebration of the past, but an invitation to the future. A new sense of nationalism was key to the creation of the fair. Eager to ensure Sputnik wouldn't eclipse America's achievements, government leaders intervened to ensure this opportunity didn't escape them. Washington Senator Warren Magnuson told Seattle civic leaders and fair organizers to adopt a scientific focus for the fair. This was key to gaining federal aid and support from President Eisenhower and Congress. With the federal government backing them up, Rochester and his entourage went to Paris to meet with the Bureau of International Expositions to legitimize the fair. The Bureau approved the idea of another World's Fair, but there were other cities other than Seattle that the Bureau was considering. Other cities were New York, San Francisco, and Moscow. New York had the inside track to be the location of the World's Fair, but the city was in the midst of a labor union problem that caused extremely inflated prices and complicated labor contracts. These obstacles would make constructing a World's Fair in New York a grinding process. In addition, New York had been the location of the 1939 World's Fair. For these reasons, the Bureau chose Seattle to host the World's Fair.
The first World's Fair in the United States in 22 years has its gala opening in Seattle. There are 74 acres of educational and entertainment exhibits at this $80 million exposition that is expected to play host to 10 million visitors during its 4-month run. The theme of the fair is Century 21, and it looks like a bright summer in its future. The first official ceremony before the fair actually gets underway calls for the light from a distant star to send a signal to the fair grounds as President Kennedy presses a telegraph key. Light that left the star 10,000 years ago releases balloons, and the Seattle World's Fair is underway.
With the Cold War and the space race being fueled by the struggle, the public was very interested in the idea of what the future held and what innovations were being made. Because of this interest, the Space Needle was eventually created for the key purpose of being a beacon of innovation and also attracting tourists. The 605-foot saucer-shaped tower was a huge hit for visitors of the World's Fair, with an attendance of a little over 2 million over the 6-month period of the fair. Although there wasn't much innovative to architecture, the structure still creates awe for many people around the world because of its ridiculously futuristic design.
What parts of it did you find most interesting?
Well, of course, the Space Needle.
Yeah.
That was the biggie. I watched my brother come in on a ship from the tallest building in Seattle at the time, the Smith Tower.
Yeah.
So then to come and go to the Space Needle was incredible. So much higher, of course,
Yeah.
and no other tall buildings.
But the Space Needle isn't just a cool tourist destination. It also represented ideals of 1962. The ideal that instead of living in fear of nuclear war or the fact that Russia could be spying on us with Sputnik, we as Americans could be relieved that we were in fact making big steps in progress for science. This idea was also shared by the construction of the monorail, which is still huge among visitors and natives of Seattle alike, with annual ridership being 2 million people. The ideals of the Century 21 Expo couldn't just be presented through large structures, though. They had to be shared through smaller innovations of the time, which were to do with the telephone, which was most exciting for most fairgoers. Innovations included bell beepers, as well as call waiting and automatic dialing by inserting a number in the phone, as well as an increased call speed of 20 seconds.
And of course, we spent a lot of time in the AT&T booth, which was the phones of the future.
Yeah.
And I remember my friend, her name was Nan, and we just were hysterical thinking about the idea that if somebody called us, what if we were in the bathtub?
Yeah.
Or, that they would actually be able to see us, which is nothing now. I mean,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
all the FaceTime and stuff that people do, but then it was, and call waiting, that was, nobody had call waiting then, so that was really new to think that you could have another call coming in at the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
time. So all of those telephone things, that was really cool.
There were many other exhibits of these futuristic ideas, as well as many exhibits of multiple different countries, cultures, and food.
The Seattle World's Fair was more than just a fair. For many who visit the fair site, it was a deeply personal and sometimes even a life-changing experience. This World Fair, otherwise known as Century 21, gave visitors a glimpse of the future and left Seattle with a lasting legacy. It gave Seattle worldwide recognition, effectively putting it on the map. Many of the concepts and icons of Century 21 remain ingrained in Seattle's culture, even as the real 21st century begins. The Century 21 Exposition has had a lasting effect on the city of Seattle. Before the fair, few people knew where the city was and thought it was a suburb of Washington, D.C., or was a logging town of sailors and soldiers. After the fair, almost everyone knew about the up-and-coming city. The World's Fair helped turn around the declining downtown area. After the post-war boom, many people had been moving into the suburbs, causing the city to start declining downwards. The popularity of the event brought many people back into the location, giving a greatly needed boost to the economy and its culture. It helped boost major infrastructure projects such as the completion of the I-5 bridge and the SR 520 bridge, and also led to investments for further internal improvements. The fair also left the city with a refurbished waterfront, street side, and new buildings, as well as permanent landmarks that are still in use today. The Seattle Center, being one of those, contains many of the well-known attractions of this area. The monorail is still in existence today also and is frequently used for transportation throughout the city. Also, what was the United States Science Pavilion is now the Pacific Science Center. It now hosts many popular attractions and exhibits. Lastly, and most importantly, the World Fair has left Seattle with the internationally recognized icon of Seattle, the Space Needle. The Space Needle is still one of the symbols used the most for the city in various pop culture references and immediately separates the city's skyline from any other in the world. With its unique futuristic architecture and observation deck that provides a bird's eye view of the entire city, the Space Needle draws tourists from all over the planet and keeps them coming back to get another look at the wonder created from the fair.
Yeah, it's a high point in my memory, the
Yeah.
idea to have been able to watch the city grow the way it has, come
Yeah.
back for frequent visits.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing,
Yeah.
the whole experience. And the idea of having countries come together and show their technology. I wasn't into technology really.
Yeah.
I mean, I was more about looking at people and eating
Yeah.
food and stuff, but riding the rides, still think it's a cool thing to do. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I don't even know if they do them anymore. But,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's pretty memorable.
Yeah.
The World Fair of 1962, or Century 21, left Seattle with a lasting impact and legacy that can still be seen today.